Yeah, it did seem like they wanted to give Snoop Connor sort of the first crack at rushing work. The one thing I will say, though, is McFarland still looked as quick as ever, and he's the guy who I have projected to be more efficient on the ground and through the air. And you can't, I just don't want to be in a position where I'm kicking myself because Anthony McFarland had a 70-yard receiving touchdown, and I didn't get enough exposure there. So McFarland doesn't project as a particularly good value, but you have to bake in some pretty extreme single play upside. Hey guys, welcome to the Week 2 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm here with Millionaire Maker winner and one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. I'm wishing that we had a 4-game slate. We've only got 3 games on this slate. Very strange the way it's broken up with, I guess because of Easter, we don't have the 4th game until Tuesday, which is odd, but it is what it is. It's still going to be a fun slate.
Yeah, it is a 3-game main slate. That will be our primary focus on this show. I have a few notes for the Tuesday Showdown slate, but that is pretty far off. Anything updated, of course, you will find in our Discord. You can also access our full UFL product this season with a Fantasy Pro or Fantasy Bundle subscription. Promo code UFL 2026 saves you 10%. That includes our player projections, our ownership projections. Any prop picks will be in our paywall Discord, which is also where I will put in any more detailed showdown advice, any late-breaking updates. This is certainly worth checking out. You can see the subscription page over on our screen right now. And again, you can save 10% with promo code UFL 2026. Neil, let's get right into these games here. We can start off with the DC Defenders at the Columbus Aviators. This game kicks off on Friday night. The Defenders are 3-point favorites. The total is 40.5. Neil, are there any bets that sort of stand out to you in that game before we get into some of the plays here?
Not really. I mean, they've brought the total down to looks like 39.5, which is, I think, pretty fair. You know, I've been hammering the unders, not actually because I live in Minnesota, but I've been a big fan of the unders, and now they brought the totals down enough that I don't know that I see any bet there.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable. I would probably lean the under as well. I'm not sure I have a strong lean on the spread with DC favored by 3 points, like I said. All right, Neil, Jordan Ta'amu was a disaster last week. I mean, he took 6 sacks. The Defenders only ran 46 plays. They just really couldn't get anything going. That said, we did see a pretty, I would say, a good reminder of what this offense was capable of. Ta'amu still took some downfield shots. They were still very pass-heavy. And most importantly, we saw glimpses of the pace that got them to the league-leading play rate last year. Last year, they were at 63, 64 plays per game. And that's obviously awesome for fantasy. I'm still holding out hope that Ta'amu can have a great fantasy season here. I am a little bit worried about the offensive line. The team did just sign veteran tackle Yasir Durant, who started 20 games for them over the last couple of seasons. The problem, though, is it was announced Durant will not play this week. His debut will be in Week 3. So, it's hard to say, especially in some of these more lopsided Week 1 matchups, how much was DC's offensive line failures because of, playing in a tough environment in St. Louis having a great defensive front versus the DC offensive line just being kind of incompetent. We'll see this week how that plays out, and I think in future weeks, this offensive line will improve with Durant. All that said, I'm still very interested in Ta'amu for fantasy this week. He's got a pretty strong projection. This is a guy that I definitely want to play and stack pretty heavily. And Neil, I think the stack's going to be a bit more condensed. We got word earlier today, Seth Williams is out. And that leaves, your presumptive 3 wide receiver set as Ty Scott, Braylon Sanders, Kiki Cutie. We still don't know about Cornell Powell's status, but I do imagine he will play. So Neil, with sort of all of that laid out, what do you think of the wide receivers, in this game, on DC? How do you want to stack up Jordan Ta'amu?
Yeah, I think Ty Scott, clearly one of the best receiving options on the entire slate. We know that he's a very talented receiver. We see that the volume is going to be there. He is, looks like we're projecting him for over 50% ownership. Probably fair. I mean, it's a 3-game slate. You're not going to get too many great plays that are going to be low owned. So even at that level of ownership, I think Ty Scott is something that I'll probably be pretty close to the field there, and I'll of course be stacking quite a bit with Teamu. Like you said, like we see the upside there with DC. Maybe after the big failure at high ownership in week 1, we see the ownership come down a fair amount. So yeah, I think Teamu is a strong play. Quarter of the field play in him seems about fair. I think Ty Scott, a clearly very strong play also. And then beyond those two, I can't sort projection by position right now, so I'm having to scroll a little bit to find everybody. But Kiki QT was the primary slot receiver in week 1. It looks like we've got him at single digit ownership. I think that he's a very strong play as well. I think he's a talented receiver, going to be running the slot, maybe without Seth Williams a little bit more involved in the offense. And then it's a little bit tougher without knowing Cornell Powell's status. I am going to like one, maybe both of Cornell Powell and Braylon Sanders. It's going to come down to what ownership looks like when the slate actually plays. But yeah, Braylon Sanders, currently we have him in single digit ownership at 3,900. I think if Powell plays, he'll obviously be higher owned than that, but I would love him if he is in single digit ownership. I think even with Cornell Powell active, and then obviously if Cornell Powell is out, he's going to look like a very strong play. And then Powell himself, 5,400. Unclear what his ownership is going to look like at this point, but he is we've seen what he can do when he plays. He's going to be he's too cheap if he is a full-time player. So I'm going to like this passing attack all around. I think everybody is a pretty strong play of those four.
Yeah, I'm with you. I will be mostly double and triple stacking Teamu. Just really want to lean into the idea of sort of a bounce back spot for this DC passing attack. Only other guy to mention here is the running back, Deon Jackson, and man, this workload for Deon Jackson was awesome. 18 of 19 running back opportunities, 96% of weighted opportunity. Abram Smith did not log a snap from scrimmage until the second half. Zaquandre Valade played 19% of snaps, but they were all just sort of empty looks. He did some pass blocking, ran a couple routes, and that was really it. Deon Jackson got the full running back workload for DC last week. Of course, the problem with Deon Jackson and DC running backs in general is that this team doesn't check down to running backs much at all. This is always the team with the lowest running back target share, so we can't bank on a ton of pass game involvement for Deon Jackson. That said, any running back earning 90+% of backfield weighted opportunity, even in a backfield that's not particularly valuable, like the DC defenders, is still pretty awesome. So you're going to see Deon Jackson be, I think, quite popular this week. He's projecting pretty well in our numbers, and I think across the board in the industry. My favorite angle with Deon Jackson would probably be including him on full-blown DC onslaughts and hoping for a major offensive bounce back from DC. But I think you can also pair him with the DC defense, play him solo. A lot of good options there. And then, of course, we're not considering Abram Smith or Zaquandre Valade after the workload that Deon Jackson earned in week 1. All right, Neil, moving over to the Columbus side, Jalen Mcleddon at quarterback was a guy who I didn't write up. I still see some fantasy potential there, and he's a guy that I will probably end up getting to in some of the larger field GPPs. But, Neil, I was hoping you could talk a bit more about maybe Mcleddon and then some potential stacking options here at wide receiver. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I loved Mcleddon this week, and that did not go so well for me. But I love him still. If he's going to be low owned because it didn't really work out in week 1, I'm going to lean in and play quite a bit of Jalen Mcleddon. Frankly, we've got him at single digit ownership right now. I would like him even, I think, at 20% ownership. I think Mcleddon is one of the stronger options on the slate. Again, we've seen him have success. Of course, we've told the story a billion times. Has not played a ton of football in his life. Still, I think that he is, or since high school, I think he's a very, very strong option. We've seen even with limited reps, he's been very good at times. And this is a team that actually gave up quite. DC didn't score. Sorry, St. Louis didn't score that much on them, but they took the loss. I think that Mcleddon is a strong enough, he'll run some, and we do have a better sample of who he's going to be throwing the ball to, and that was kind of unclear what we were going to be looking at last week because we had so many different options, and the depth chart changed over time. I think Antwain Wells was projected to be a starter at one point and then went away anyway. Now we have kind of a better idea of who to stack him with. I think Tay Martin is a really strong option. I know he only ran 69% of routes last week, but he was targeted 8 times, and they really seemed to be trying to get him the ball. I mean, we saw him at the goal line, at the 1 yard line. They designed a play that was just like straight up get the ball to Tay Martin. They was just like immediately get the ball, throw it to him, got knocked down. He didn't get the touchdown. But they 8 targets and they tried to get him one in the end zone. I think Tay Martin is going to be a really strong option with Jalen Mcleddon. Certainly Kiki Chisholm, I think, is a solid wide receiver. Ran 82% of the routes, saw 5 targets. So I think he is another pretty strong option. And then Rock Taylor, I think you can mix in. I think Wells is probably like borderline playable in the largest field contest, not like the strongest option, and that's probably where I cut it off. But my favorites, I would say Tay Martin, Kiki Chisholm are the kind of top tier for me, and then Rock Taylor a tier below those two, and then Wells kind of a tournament dart throw if you're playing several like 100 lineups.
Yeah, totally align with you there. Not really interested in any of these tight ends here. At running back, Zaquandre White did move up the official depth chart. He is now the starter. I think that's because he looked the best of the 3 running backs last week. Averaged about 16 yards a carry, which was pretty great. Toa still did lead the way in terms of raw carries. I have a pretty gross 3-way split projected here. You could see the week 1 bell cow report on your screen. I just don't see a ton of upside for any of these running backs. I think if I am going to play one, it's probably Zaquandre White, but you just have to be mentally prepared for him to get vultured by Toa at the goal line, who I still think is the pretty heavy favorite for goal line carries here in Columbus. Only other note that I'll add on the Aviators is Jalen Mcleddon. I probably won't get quite as aggressive stacking him as I would a Jordan Teamu. But yeah, single double stacks I think are plenty viable there. Neil, anything to add on stacking before we move on to this next game?
No, I agree with that. The running back situation. It's funny because it's the 3-game slate. So I'm sort of interested in they brought the mini max back, by the way, so you can play 150 lineups for $75. So maybe in the mini max I'll take some shots on these running backs because it is, again, it's a 3-game slate, and at some point maybe one of them does break away, and it was really gross. It's hard to watch last week as somebody who had a good amount of Toa. I felt really smart when he came in and got the first carry. I was like, I knew it. I knew they were faking us out, and then it was just a gross 3-way split. So hard to know, but at some point maybe one of them actually does win a bigger role. We don't know if that's going to happen this week. I think it's more of a mini max play than a $20 tournament play.
Yeah, and a final note on Zaquandre is that he was kind of the clear passing down back. So, if you expect Columbus to fall behind here, that might be worth a bit of a boost for Zaquandre White. All right, moving on to our second game. This game kicks off at 8 p.m. on Saturday. It's the Louisville Kings at the Orlando Storm. Total is 41.5. That's kind of moved around. I saw 40.5 earlier today. Louisville is a 3.5 point underdog here. Neil, I think I might like the Louisville side of this game actually with the points. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think I like the Orlando side.
Okay,
I'm a big believer in Anthony Becht. I think he's a strong coach, and I don't know. I guess I don't feel that strongly about it one way or the other. I would expect Orlando to win. Maybe with the points, certainly you can make the case for Louisville. Bean looked decent in week 1. I'm such a believer in Anthony Becht. It's hard for me to bet against him.
Yeah, no, it is a huge coaching advantage for Orlando. I was not particularly impressed with Chris Redman and some of the decisions that he made. I mean, they kicked a field goal on the 2-yard line on 4th down. That was pretty gross. Jason Bean, though, is someone that I am very excited about and was fairly impressed with in week 1. Only scored 13.7 DraftKings points, but he looked really good as a rusher. He led all quarterbacks with a 31% designed rush share. That's a very high and very encouraging number. Granted, they didn't run a ton of plays, so you would expect that to come down if they run closer to 60, 65 plays as opposed to, I believe they logged something like 48, 47 last week. But the air yards also, oh my God, 419 air yards, 135 more than the next closest quarterback. So this is kind of everything that we're looking for in a fantasy quarterback. He can run. He's throwing downfield. We have a fairly condensed passing tree because Isaiah Winstead is expected to be out this week. I noted in my article I'm a little worried about pace in this game, but that's sort of the only concern that I have. If this game ends up being gross, maybe Jason Bean doesn't have a great game, but if this game, can put up points, we can have a lot of plays, Jason Bean's going to be an awesome, awesome fantasy asset. So, Neil, any final thoughts on Jason Bean? And then what do you think of these wide receivers? Because, like I said, Isaiah Winstead, nasty concussion last week. I would be shocked if he played this week. And then things did condense a lot after Winstead left the game in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Bean, like you said, is just like kind of made to be a fantasy quarterback because he does run and he throws down the field. That's kind of the dream. It's what we're always looking for in our fantasy quarterbacks, and kind of makes quarterbacks often kind of boom bust. But he's coming in at fair, like 16% currently ownership on a 3-game slate, certainly fair. And then of course we know who we want to be stacking with. Lucky Jackson, the clear number 1 option here. I don't have any thoughts on who is going to be playing more. I guess Winstead left the game early, so maybe we have some idea of who's replaced. Was it Caden Prather who came in and ran?
Yeah, so they didn't really seem like they were ready for Isaiah Winstead being, knocked out of this game. I was a bit panicked that PFF wasn't going to post their UFL data, so I actually manually charted all the wide receiver routes of the first 2 games last week, and this was one of them. After Winstead left the game, they moved to a bit more 12, so both Trey McKitty and Zach Davidson were playing a bit more, but the 3 wide receiver sets mostly included Caden Prather. They really didn't get to Carter Bell much at all. Bell did play on the final drive. They ran some 10 personnel stuff, and he was in the slot then. But I think the 3 wide receiver set is going to be Lucky Jackson, Tariq Black, Caden Prather. And that's sort of the order that I like playing these guys. I think if you're playing Jason Bean, I want Lucky Jackson in almost all of those lineups. Tariq Black seems to be more of like a win sprint deep threat type guy, but he did log, if I remember correctly, about a 17% target share in week 1, so that's certainly encouraging. And then, Prather would be the guy that I'd be the least excited about, and I'm not necessarily super confident in his playing time. Like I said, they might try to take him off the field for an extra tight end. Maybe they try to work Carter Bell in there a little bit more. We also don't know if Javonte Payton will be active for this one. So I currently have Payton projected in, but not with a significant route share, significant target share, or anything like that. So, Neil, anything to add on those wide receivers, and then I can wrap it up with the backfield.
I mean, we once we see the depth chart, if JP Payton is listed as a starter, then I'm going to be interested in JP Payton if he ends up being a starter. Like you said, like hard to project him for much, but he's a guy that we know has been a strong UFL receiver in the past. He could be the pretty clear number 2 receiver here potentially, just because beyond Lucky Jackson, we don't have a ton of known quantities on this team. So if JP Payton ends up being active and he's on like listed as a starter on the depth chart, then I would have a lot of interest in JP Payton, but we're going to have to wait and see what we see.
Yeah, and we do also have a Showdown slate for this game, the Sunday game, and the Tuesday game. So if you are playing Showdown, I'm not getting to these guys on the main slate, but if you are playing Showdown, I think either tight end, Zach Davidson or Trey McKitty, would be pretty interesting. Davidson was a guy who got a lot of camp hype, and then he had 2 awful drops in week 1. One of them was like comically bad, where it was bouncing off his hands and his helmet, and then it ended up being an interception. But I think either of those guys would be pretty live for a touchdown, maybe a deep catch, and would be pretty interesting for Showdown. The backfield here, it was looking like it was going to be a very gross 3-way split off the rip, and then Ian Wheeler had a truly disgusting goal line fumble. I believe it was Tizino from Birmingham who punched that out, and Wheeler was subsequently benched for the remainder of the game, leading to sort of a 2-man backfield between Benny Snell and Jaden Shirden. Now, Benny Snell did finish with a 66% snap share, which is incredibly encouraging. That said, he only had 6 total opportunities. So, 4.8 weighted opportunity, 48% of team weighted opportunity. That's not great. I do think that if, a bell cow is going to emerge on this team, it will be Benny Snell. None of these rushers looked very good. I didn't think they had much of a rushing attack outside of what Jason Bean was doing. But, if you're going to play a running back who doesn't necessarily project very well, I think I'd want to play a little bit of Benny Snell. Just not a guy I'm very excited about. Maybe paired with the defense and some large field GPPs, something like the Mini Max or the $20. I think that's about all I got on the Louisville backfield. Moving on to the other side of this game, Orlando is a team that I came away from week one feeling pretty excited about. Jack Plummer doesn't necessarily come off to me as a great fantasy quarterback just based on his raw skill set, but I think he's in a really good environment and could potentially have some really good fantasy outings. And Neil, we have a very, very condensed wide receiver route tree here. Why don't you talk about some of these potential stacking partners for Plummer and what you think about Plummer overall?
Yeah, I think Plummer is, and I'm trying to figure out, because we kind of have all of the quarterbacks sort of in a tight range as far as where they're coming in ownership-wise. I suspect that anybody who's over 20%, I'm kind of probably going to cut them down to about 20% right now to get up on Jalen Mcleddon, who I like quite a bit, and I think he's the one that I want to be like the most over the field right now. But I do think Jack Plummer. Sorry, I still want to call him Jake
mistake
Plummer.
To make.
Yeah, I still like he played okay. I think that he was serviceable. 21% ownership. Like I'm not going to be far off from the field with Jack Plummer. And then, but what I do like about him is I probably am going to be double stacking Jack Plummer, and we have really strong options here. And Chris Rowland, really talented receiver, ran 96% of the routes, was targeted 6 times. KJ Hamler ran 100% of the routes, was targeted 5 times. I think those are your clear top 2. But then Elijah Badger, also 96% route share, 3 targets. I think he's behind Rowland and Hamler to me, but I think all look like really strong plays, and you don't really need to go anywhere beyond those 3 on this team. So I love how condensed it is. I think you can double stack it, triple stack it if you want to get weird. I think that this is certainly a spot that I'm going to be attacking. Again, I don't think I'm going to be far off from the field, where the field is at 21%. I'm probably going to cap myself at 20% on these quarterbacks because I really want to get to the lower owned quarterbacks, particularly McClendon.
Yeah, I do think McClendon is popping quite a bit at ownership, but totally agree with what you said on these wide receivers. The guy that I'm the most excited about is KJ Hamler, and that's mostly just based on my eye test. I thought KJ Hamler looked awesome in week one. Like, he looked really, really fast, really quick. I'm really excited to see what KJ Hamler can do. And the other thing that I thought was encouraging about all these guys is the route tree was pretty diverse across the board. They were all getting short area targets. They were all getting some deep looks. Elijah Badger had a 90-yard touchdown that ended up getting called back because of a Chris Rowland penalty. All of these guys can be argued as really strong plays, and I'll be playing all of them. I'll probably be the most overweight relative to our current ownership projections on KJ Hamler. We have him at about 28%. But yeah, they're all good plays, and they will all be pretty popular. Beyond that, for Showdown, I really don't have too many more notes before we get to the backfield. These tight ends were not particularly involved. We don't really have significant projections on the tight ends. Jerome Cap was the only other player on the team who logged like a tangible route share, but he didn't earn a target. We're really only talking about the running backs for the rest of this show. Neil, Jashaun Corbin looked awesome, and he did lead the way here in terms of weighted opportunity. He had 55% of team weighted opportunity, 15 rush attempts, 2 targets, 61% of snaps. And Neil, I was, a bit surprised. Anthony Becht preseason said, we've got 2 studs. He wasn't lying. Elijah Dotson looked really good too. So Neil, I'm curious, Corbin's going to be super popular this week. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are more on Dotson and how interested you are in playing him after he logged 40% of snaps, 45% of team weighted opportunity in week 1.
Yeah, I think both are very strong plays. I believe this is the backfield. You said in your article you can play the 2 running backs together. Regardless, I think regardless if we were talking about, I think that's on a 3-game slate totally viable to play both running backs from the same team together if they both, project good enough, are going to have enough opportunities. This is definitely that situation. I kind of thought it was going to be the Jashaun Corbin show. I didn't really play any of Elijah Dotson. I just played Jashaun Corbin, and it worked out because he scored the touchdown. But I was kind of surprised by how much Dotson ended up playing. But yeah, I think Dotson played enough, and he's only 5,000, getting 15% ownership. Totally reasonable. Certainly you can play both of them together. Corbin going to be, one of the highest owned plays on the slate, but I think that it is deserved. I think he's a talented running back on a team that, historically has run the ball. I guess with Anthony Becht, you never really know if he's going to lean into the team strengths, but I think could continue, given all the success they had last week running the ball. I think they're probably going to continue to lean on the run with both of these running backs. So yeah, I think both are strong plays, both individually and together.
Yeah, we saw pretty much a 50-50 split with their run-pass rate last week, and that's roughly what I have projected this week. I mean, they were so efficient running the ball that I do think Orlando wants to lean in to their ground game, and that should make the passing attack even more efficient. I have Plummer projected as one of the most efficient quarterbacks on the slate. The real question is just how many attempts and dropbacks does he end up getting. All right, moving on to our final game of the main slate here. It is the Birmingham Stallions at the Houston Gamblers. Birmingham favored by 7 points here. The total has kind of been oscillating between 43.5, 44.5. Currently, DraftKings has 44.5 with a pretty heavy lean to the under. Neil, I kind of get the sense that 7 points is not enough for Birmingham right now. I think I'd take them closer to 9 or 10 points. What do you think here about the spread and total?
Yeah, I think I'm actually with you that this one is. I'd probably take the over 7.5 with Birmingham. The overall points, I think I'm still taking the under on 43.5. Even with how bad the Gamblers' defense looked last week, I just think that's a high enough total. The Gamblers might score well under their 18, and Birmingham at some point might just kind of take the air out of the ball and slow things down because they just have a big lead. So I think I'd probably take the under on 43.5, but I probably take the spread with one of those two. Both look strong to me.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. On the Birmingham side, this was a team that, I was kind of hoping would come out a little bit more pass heavy. Wasn't necessarily the case in week one. Only a 46% pass rate. Very conservative on early downs, 37% first and second down pass rate. That said, Matt Corral looks like he's going to end up being about what we thought for fantasy. A little bit of rushing upside there, but it's mostly going to be based around the efficiency of the passing attack, and hopefully we see Birmingham lean a bit more into the pass this week. Neil, I'm curious what you think about Matt Corral, who Tom pulled up this. I mean, he took a absolutely brutal hit. And this play, epitomizes who he is, where, play for play, throw for throw, not bad. And then he'll just make these tragic errors, horrific fumbles, horrific interceptions. And that's what's keeping him out of the NFL right now. That said, that stuff isn't too awful for fantasy. Only lose a point when you lose a fumble. But, man, Corral is sometimes just a real head scratcher. Still a guy that I'm very interested in this week, though, mostly because of this Birmingham implied total. I mean, 25.5 is a massive implied total, easily the highest of the week, particularly on the main slate. So, Neil, what do you think of Corral? And I'm more interested in what you think of these pass catchers, because I do think it's not quite as condensed as Orlando, but we do have closer to a big three in Birmingham than I thought we'd get in week one.
Yeah, definitely interesting. The Jaden Mickens breakout game kind of shocked me. As somebody who plays every play on the slate, really spreads out ownership, I had 0% Jaden Mickens, and I felt like such an idiot after that Friday game. 9 receptions for over 100 yards. Did not see that coming at all. Him being the lead dog. I still don't totally buy it that he's going to be the top dog going forward, but I do think this is a strong passing attack. I think Mickens very much in play. He's getting so much ownership that I'm almost certainly going to be under the 37% that he's getting now. It's he's up to 6,600. He's really expensive. I don't know. I'm not fully bought in yet. I think I need to see it again before I trust that they're going to go back to Jaden Mickens as their lead receiver when they have Deon Cain and Justin Ross there, because Deon Cain has just been such a good UFL receiver. So this is a spot where I'm going to be under on Mickens. I think the Cain ownership, we've got him a little over 30% at 7,300. Give me that. Yeah, I'll take that Cain. I'll play a ton of Cain, and then Justin Ross I think looks pretty strong. I mean, he didn't do much until that touchdown in the last game, but I think he's a Scott Barrett special. I think he's a strong wide receiver, fairly priced, fair ownership. I think it's a spot that I'm going to be playing a fair amount. I might be a little bit under the field overall in this spot again because I might cap my quarterback exposure at 20%. There's just enough that I like weirdly on this 3-game slate. It's tough for me to find anybody that I love enough to get above 20%. I think it's pretty,
Yeah.
like you can make a strong case for a lot of these quarterbacks. And then, just because I want to get higher on a lower owned guy, then I'm going to end up, I think, under on Matt Corral and these stacks, but I'm still probably going to have 20%. I'm going to be mixing it up, double stacks with Mickens, Kane, and Justin Ross. I think you can certainly include Anthony McFarland, or maybe, I mean, they both ran the same number of routes and saw the same number of targets. I consider Anthony McFarland more of the passing down back, but I guess I don't know enough about Snoop Connor, but I think you can include the running backs in your stacks.
Yeah, it did seem like they wanted to give Snoop Connor sort of the first crack at rushing work. The one thing I will say, though, is McFarland still looked as quick as ever, and he's the guy who I have projected to be more efficient on the ground and through the air. And you can't, I just don't want to be in a position where I'm kicking myself because Anthony McFarland had a 70-yard receiving touchdown, and I didn't get enough exposure there. So McFarland doesn't project as a particularly good value, but you have to bake in some pretty extreme single play upside for a guy like that. Not sure I have too much else to add. I guess a few showdown notes. We didn't really see these tight ends get too involved. I kind of thought going into week one that Jordan Thomas would be more of the main tight end, but it was a pretty even split between him and Tyler Davis, both with pretty comparable target shares and route shares. So, I still think Jordan Thomas has significantly better touchdown equity, but, they were giving Tyler Davis routes and snaps inside the 10, inside the 5. So, neither of those guys really feel like great showdown plays to me. And then there was a guy who I thought looked really good who might get more snaps in John Ross. I mean, he looked really, really fast. He had, I believe it was a 40-plus yard reception on sort of a screen that they set up a bit poorly. That was called back due to penalty. So, I do kind of wonder if the coaches watch the film and want to get John Ross some more routes. I think that would probably come at the expense of either Jaden Mickens or one of the tight ends. They really weren't rotating Ross on the outside much at all. He was almost exclusively a slot player. Laviska Shenault was getting in a little bit on the outside, but he's not a guy that I'm very excited about. I think if I'm dipping beyond sort of the big three for Showdown, John Ross would easily be my favorite option there just because he's so explosive. And again, Thomas has some John Ross highlights on the screen. And I thought he looked quite good in week one. Don't really have too much else for Birmingham. I think this is a really fun offense to stack, and because of the implied total, you can go pretty aggressive with some of these Birmingham stacks as well. All right, the Houston side. Neil, I mean, I don't know what to expect at quarterback here. I didn't write either of these quarterbacks up. I think we get Deckers starting and probably playing most of the game. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a QB rotation again. I know you were sort of talking about capping your quarterback exposure at 20% across the board. Neil, you can't play 120% of quarterbacks. We do have 6 teams on this slate. I imagine you're completely avoiding this Houston quarterback situation.
Yeah, unless we get Nolan Henderson listed as the starter, in which case maybe then I'll take some shots on him. But it's gross. I don't think I want to go here. At some point, the ownership is low enough that I might consider, again, like maybe in the mini-max I'll take a few shots, but certainly not a spot that I'm going to be loading up on. This team is not going to be getting to 20% with the quarterbacks, unless I'm like really playing from behind. I guess it could be late swapping onto some of these stacks because they do have strong receivers, but I think it's mostly a don't go into the slate planning on playing any Houston quarterback, and then depending on where my lineups are looking going into the Sunday slate, then you can swap onto some of these stacks and really make up some ground if it does end up going well. But this is not a spot that I'm going to go in planning on playing either of the quarterbacks. The receivers, of course, I'm interested. I think as you laid out in your article, Justin Hall, one of the best wide receivers in the UFL. But then we had this week Jalen Moreno-Cropper, 8 targets, looked really good. I didn't realize he only ran 45.7% of the routes. Am I reading that right?
It was really weird the way that they rotated these wide receivers. I thought Moreno-Cropper looked really, really good. And then they ended up giving Lawan Whittingham a higher route share, which is just strange because Whittingham has never been a productive UFL wide receiver. I mean, he's a guy who could barely get on the field for Arlington the last couple of years. So I don't really understand what they're doing because, the other thing about Winningham is he can make some athletic catches, but he gives you zero yak. Moreno-Cropper scored a return touchdown. He's a really electric guy after the catch. I thought that was very strange. I'm hopeful that we see more Moreno-Cropper routes this week because I just don't see how you could watch the film and say Winningham deserves to be out there over him.
Do you think it might have been punishment for the interception? There was a play that interception came because he I don't know, was jammed up, and the quarterback threw an interception, and it kind of looked like maybe he was partially at fault. I don't know. So maybe there was some element of punishment there for Cropper, but I don't know. That's strange.
Yeah, I mean, that's always possible, but this doesn't seem like a team that can afford to punish their best players. I think you just have to soak some of those mistakes. This is, Neil, do you have any tangible interest in significant exposure with these wide receivers? Justin Hall is projecting for a pretty good amount of ownership, and like I kind of laid out in my article, I'm just a bit worried that with 3 skilled pass catchers, it's going to be kind of tricky to decipher, especially on a bad offense, who we want to play here.
It is, but yeah, I do have interest. I think Moreno-Cropper, I mean, we just saw so many targets last week that 8 targets in a game for a wide receiver who's currently not projecting for a ton of ownership, and he's just 4,900. He looked talented. I think I'm probably not going to be playing a lot of these stacks going into the slate. Again, maybe late swapping, but I do think I'll go into the slate with exposure for sure to Moreno-Cropper. I'm going to have tangible exposure. I think even in the $20. Jontre Kirklin is funny because I played a lot of him last week and posted in the Fantasy Points Discord. I asked, is it just over for Jontre Kirklin? And then shortly after that, he got a few receptions and ended up looking okay in the game. And I guess he ran an 84% route share. So still in play. Yeah, I think those 3, Justin Hall, Moreno-Cropper, and Jontre Kirklin, are going to be in my player pool going into the slate. And then, depending on how things go, I might swap on to even more.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I'll be mostly looking at these guys as late swap options. I think I'm probably the most excited about Kirklin, Moreno-Cropper, just because of the lower ownership there. Kirklin actually ran more routes than Justin Hall, which, again, another kind of weird decision by Houston. He's one of the best wide receivers in the league, and yet you're keeping Justin Hall off the field. I mean, he should have an 100% route share. He should be one of those guys that's out there for basically every single play. Really, really weird. Kevin Sublin had the worst vibes ever in this post-game press conference. He looked totally dejected. He was super frustrated. One of the reporters asked him a question from Zoom that actually was for a St. Louis Battlehawks, it was regarding the St. Louis Battlehawks. It was from a previous presser, and Sumlin went yep, that's the story of the day for us. I'm not blaming you, but this is just how things are going for us right now. Which I thought was just ridiculous. We replaced Curtis Johnson, but I don't know that we necessarily upgraded a ton.
That's wild.
In Houston. Yeah. Okay, so, this backfield, I'm not getting to any of these guys on main slate, but we do kind of have to talk through this for Showdown, which is unfortunate. In week 1, we saw Marcus Yarns lead the way in terms of raw weighted opportunity. That was because he had both a red zone rush and a red zone target. That said, no one in this backfield had more than 5 total opportunities, and snaps were extremely spread out. Marcus Yarns 28%, Kirk Merritt 35%, Jalen White 39%. I don't really know what to make of this. I imagine it's going to stay a gross committee moving forward. They were giving Jalen White and Kirk Merritt preference on passing downs. They were sort of mixing up all these guys on early downs. Of course, like I said, Yarns got some of that red zone work, but Jalen White got a red zone carry too. Jalen White also led the way in snaps, which makes me think they kind of want him to be the lead back, but they had to throw a ton last week. They were down immediately. Really didn't get the chance to run the ball much at all. Neil, I think Kirk Merritt and Jalen White are probably the 2 guys I'd be the most excited about for Showdown. Do you have anything to add there? It's just so gross.
And Jalen White was also listed as the starter, right?
Yes.
If I remember right on the depth chart. So yeah, I think given that they were trying to make it happen, maybe it was just maybe in the right game script they would actually give Jalen White more opportunities if the game stays even or they have a lead, maybe Jalen White does like take on a big workload here. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I'm not going to get to any of these guys on the main slate, but on the showdown slate, yeah, you can certainly get to either Merritt or Jalen White. And I think I don't know what my preference is because I really like the PPR points, especially for showdown. But Jalen White is intriguing from the perspective of he probably has the highest upside as the guy that they're trying to establish. If they are trying to get the run game going, he's probably the most likely to see a big uptick in usage.
Yeah, that would be the hope at least. But yeah, that's showdown only. Neil, Tuesday's showdown, I wanted to at least talk through a few notes here. I don't even have this game projected yet, but I do think there are some pretty important things to note if you're playing the Tuesday showdown, which is an 8K prize pool, 2K to first. Kind of weird that we have a game on Tuesday, and a bit frustrating for me getting ready for the subsequent week. But hey, that's spring football for you. Neil, the big thing that stood out to me when I looked at these showdown prices is that Ellis Merriweather, 6,600. I mean, this is his workload in week 1 was truly unbelievable. He earned the 3rd most targets by any running back in UFL history. His 7 red zone opportunities were the 5th most ever in a UFL regular season game. He also cleared a 70% snap share, despite being on the field for just 3 snaps in the 4th quarter. They were mostly leaning on Lorenzo Lingard to close the game out because there was just no reason to play Merriweather at that point. He finished with 28.5 weighted opportunities. That's the 2nd best single game workload in UFL history and the 4th best workload in modern spring football history. Also, this offense looked incredible. So it's like a bell cow on a great offense. This is everything we could possibly ask for. I was so sad to see that he was not on the main slate because this would have been a guy that I might have hit the lock button on, regardless of price. Yeah, he's a fantastic play for the showdown. I mean, I'll probably put him in every single showdown lineup that I have in some capacity. And then the other note that I had is that Hakeem Butler is expected to play in this game, and I'm really not sure what this is going to do to the wide receiver rotations. We saw Frank Darby sort of lead the way on the outside to start week 1, and then he just mysteriously disappeared and got benched for Gary Jennings. We don't have an injury report yet either for this game, so if there was some sort of mystery Darby injury, an injury report could clear that up. He was on the sideline with his helmet, though, like standing next to AJ Smith, so I assume this was some sort of a benching, or maybe AJ just decided Gary Jennings is actually the guy, but that makes it really hard to project these pass catchers because we haven't seen Hakeem Butler in action. We're not sure how they're going to rotate on the outside between Gary Jennings and Frank Darby. They also had Stephen McBride play basically every single snap in the other outside role. Like, you would think the better set would be Gary Jennings on one side, Frank Darby on the other. That's not how they handled it. It was Stephen McBride who earned 5 targets, but they were all like over his head. Some of them were borderline throwaways. Yeah, I think that does it for my notes. Oh, the only other one would be Blake Jackson was working ahead of Ja'Cour Pearson in terms of rotations. When they were going 11 personnel, it was Blake Jackson in there almost every time. Pearson got a few more 11 personnel reps down at the very end of the game on that last drive. But I did think that was a bit interesting that Blake Jackson was working a little ahead of him. Neil, any other notes for this showdown slate?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to break down without like having the ownership
Right.
in front of us, or frankly, even the prices. I don't see. I guess I could pull that up, but yeah, I think that it's going to be tough until we see the depth charts. I think Hakeem Butler is pretty clearly going to be listed as a starter, or I would assume that would be the case. I guess nothing can be taken for granted in the UFL these days, but Hakeem Butler almost certainly going to be a starter. It is pretty wild looking through the route participation this week. Steve McBride at 94%, Blake Jackson 97%. Did not realize that Ja'Cour Pearson was down at 78%. But I think all are certainly playable on a showdown slate. I think Pearson, if he ends up getting his ownership discounted at all after a disappointing performance, I think I'll still lean back there. I still think that he's a talented receiver. So I have interest in Pearson, but it's going to come down to who ends up being low owned. If Blake Jackson, people aren't adjusting for the better role, then I'll play Blake Jackson. But yeah, I think all of these receivers look okay. I think your note on Merriweather being, I don't know if I'll have him in every single showdown lineup, but certainly, I mean, you could. Maybe I will. I mean, I think it's totally reasonable, strong captain play. Yeah, it's tough to break down because this is just a game with a lot of firepower. Like there's just a lot of players that I like from this game. But I think Merriweather, certainly the strongest play from the Dallas side. And then, Butler, if he plays, is going to probably be my favorite St. Louis play. I don't really have much in the way of other notes other than we're going to have to wait and see how ownership breaks down. Make sure you're in the Fantasy Points Discord to talk about it once we get all of the updated information. But it's going to be a fun game.
Yeah, we won't have ownership projections for this slate, this Showdown slate in particular. But I think once sort of industry projections settle, we should have a pretty good sense of where ownership will be, and I'll be sure to update everyone in the Fantasy Points Discord. The other tough thing about this slate, Neil, is I don't think salary is going to be a big concern because Merriweather's so cheap. We also have Blake Jackson's 2,800. Stephen McBride could potentially run every single route for St. Louis. He's just 1,000. So. This will be a really interesting Showdown slate. I'll have a more sort of comprehensive breakdown on this Showdown slate in the paywalled UFL DFS Fantasy Points Discord channel. I'll cook up a thread with some notes, some maybe have some ownership notes, some player projection notes, stacking notes, all that good stuff. But that'll do it for our Week 2 UFL breakdown. We really appreciate all of you guys for tuning in. I hope everyone enjoys the games this weekend, and we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.
This